Now we're in the peak accumulation stage for this family unit, and assume that it's been 10 years since the last stage, which was the career development. So quick check of the facts. Their ages, so 10 years later, they're 55 both. Here's their gross income, and here's their net income after Social Security deductions and income tax withholding. We assume that their living expenses on an after-tax basis is $75,000. Therefore, their surplus is $56,000. And this would be the after-tax cash flow available after all expenses. And let's have a look at some other factors that are important when we're doing the financial planning for this family. Pensions, the government. Paul is a teacher, so he has an enhanced government pension plan, whereas Jessica has a basic one. But they also have pension through work or personal, and those are the respective amounts. And life insurance is the next thing. So there's life insurance through work. Paul has life insurance. However, Jessica does not have insurance through work, but they do have privately purchased life insurance. And it's important to know that these are face values. In other words, this is the present value of whatever life insurance they would get. Whereas the pension amounts, these amounts would be paid on an annual basis once they were to retire. Okay. And then the last policy that we're going to look at is their disability insurance. And so there's disability insurance through Social Security, like the government. And these would be the respective amounts. These would be payable on an annual basis. But it looks like they also have private disability insurance. And however, instead of being expressed in annual terms, they just give us the face value. And the face value itself is just equal to the present value of the disability income stream that would kick in the event that either of these individuals became disabled. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take all those facts and construct the economic balance sheet for this family. And for the assets, we're going to look at all sources of cash inflow. And so we're going to look at both the explicit assets and implicit assets. So the explicit assets are things like, these things, savings, investments, retirement plans, the house if they do plan to sell it. So these are your conventional assets. But in an economic balance sheet, we look at all sources of cash flow. So the other, implicit assets are cash inflows that are not found in a typical conventional balance sheet. So the first one being pension. Pension certainly represents cash inflow. It would kick in from the time that they retire until their time of death. So we take the present value of that. And at the same time, we look at their human capital, which is the present value of their wages from the current year until they retire. So if we add up all their assets, which includes present value of cash inflows, it'd be about $3 million. Okay, so these are either assets that they own or assets which will generate cash flows in the future, which are part of that $3 million. On the other hand, for liabilities, we like to look at all sources of cash outflow. So again, you have your conventional liabilities like mortgage and debt. And it seems that at this stage of their life, all their debts have been paid off, so there's no debt. However, the other source of cash outflow is going to be their lifetime consumption. And the assumption is that they would like to maintain their current lifestyle, which currently is running at $75,000 a year in expenditures. And this would be required from the current age of 55 until the time of death, age 90. So when we find the present value of $75,000 per year over that span, we get a present value of cash outflows equal to that amount. Now, once we have the present value of all the cash inflows right there, and we subtract the present value of cash outflows, we get what's called net worth, which is currently $848,000. Now, what's really happening is the following. As individuals age, their human capital shrinks and their financial capital increases. Now, the financial capital is liquid because it's going to be in investments. And so as their financial capital increases, a greater chunk of their total wealth becomes liquid at the same time. So a little diagram to show what's happening here. We start off with human capital, so that's us working and generating employment income. But human capital is illiquid. So for instance, even if someone has a human capital worth $2 million, that doesn't mean that they have $2 million in cash in their pocket. That just means their earning stream is worth $2 million. So it's quite illiquid. You're not going to get that cash flow until at least over your entire working years. So that's pretty illiquid. But then what happens is when, people make employment income, they allocate part of it or they invest part of it into portfolios and stocks and bonds and what have you. So then their financial capital increases during that time. So what's really happening over time is that an individual's income is shifting from employment income to investment income. So early on, most of the total income is through employment. But then at later stages in life, the investment income dominates. And certainly during retirement, there's no employment income. So it's all going to have to come from investment income. And again, the other observation there is that your wealth is becoming liquid. So there's two things happening. The transfer of wealth from human capital, financial capital, and the other dimension is liquidity. So early on, it's fair to say most people are illiquid compared to where they will be later on in life, where they have sufficient financial assets and therefore sufficient liquidity. Okay, and again, why would human capital be decreasing as people age? Well, human capital is present value of employment income, and as people age, they'll have fewer working years left. So what are the risk management issues at this stage? Again, these individuals are 55 and they have 2 children that are growing. Earnings risk is still an issue because they're still working. So one of them could come through job loss. However, this may be self-insured through savings. So for example, if someone loses their job, they could just draw their income from savings. So there is no insurance product for job loss. Which means you can't go out there and buy a policy against job loss. There is a government unemployment benefit, which is standard, but there's no private insurance product that'll give you more money if you should lose a job. So job loss is really largely self-insured. And how's that done? People have to put some money aside in case they lose a job and they have that transition period. The next earnings risk is disability. If any of these individuals become disabled, they'd stop making earnings. So let's run a scenario as to what would happen if any of these individuals were disabled. And let's focus on Jessica just for a second. If she did become disabled, she would actually stop making income from work. So she would lose out $77,900. However, if she did become disabled, the government disability benefit would kick in and she would make $30,000 from the government. However, that would still leave a shortfall of $47,180. Okay, and similar exercise for Paul indicates that his shortfall would be $17,000 if he should ever become disabled. Now, the thing is, this is an annual shortfall, but they still have a lot of working years. So they would actually need that shortfall on an annual basis over the term of their working years. So it's an annuity. So you could see what we did with Jessica here. We took that payment stream per year and we said, if she needs that amount of income for 10 years, and we used, in this case, we assumed that her income would grow at 2%. And so we are using the growth adjusted discount rate. And the logic here is that, if we're going to be using a constant cash flow amount, which is effectively today's dollars, we want to keep the discount rate on a real basis as well. So if the nominal rate is 3%, and if income growth is 2%, and the assumption we want to make there is that The reason why they need their income to grow 2% is because the goods and services that they buy, the inflation on that is 2%. So never mind what the broader inflation rate is. We have to look at the inflation that's specific to this family unit. And if they need their income to grow 2% per year, we can assume it's because the goods that they buy is increasing 2% per year. Long story short, we're using the real discount rate. Okay. So once we calculate present value, we get the following figures for Jessica, 452, and we get 163 for Paul. Now we want to compare these to the existing disability insurance coverage they have. So for example, in the case of Jessica, you could see the comparison here. Our calculations indicate she needs a total disability insurance of 452. However, we look at what she has, and she's got 633.9. So she has more insurance, more disability insurance than she needs. And similar story for Paul. You could see he only needs 163, but he has 365. So what's the observation? Both are overinsured with respect to disability. Therefore, they should reduce their coverage and therefore save on the premium costs. What is the other risk that applies to this family unit? Premature death. Certainly if one of the individuals passed, it would affect the surviving members financially. And there's two approaches to calculating how much life insurance is needed. The first approach is needs analysis. And this approach basically covers how much insurance we need in order to pay for the survivor's expenditures. So the way this approach works is as follows. First, we find out what the cash outflows would be for the survivors. Then we look at how much cash inflow the survivors would bring in. And then the gap is what the life insurance is trying to bridge. So let's look at these scenarios. So the first scenario we're going to look at is what would happen if Peter died. In other words, if Peter died, how would this affect the cash outflow needs of the surviving members? So if Peter died, Jessica and the children would need $35,000 immediately to pay for funeral, pay off debts, and create an emergency reserve. And then we have to look at the survivor's cash flow needs. So you can see Jessica, she would have cash outflows from today until time of death, 90. That has a present value of 1191. And then the children. So we have Peter's cash outflow needs. And again, because Peter's special needs, the family's planning to accommodate for him from the current age up until he's 90 or the time of death. On the other hand, Roxanne, at this point, she's considered as independent. So she's probably, according to the case, she's mid-20s, if not late 20s at this point. And she's basically, we're told she's independent. So she does not need to be planned for as far as Paul and Jessica. And just a correction note again, I just want to distinguish Paul and Peter. Paul is the father or one of the spouses, and Peter is the child. So again, we should be talking about what would happen if Paul passed away. Okay. So to sum this up, if Paul was to die, the surviving members would have cash outflow needs whose present value is equal to 1908. And similar exercise for Jessica reveals the same number. Now, why are the numbers the same, the 1908? It's because irrespective of which spouse passes, to maintain the lifestyle of the surviving members, we would have to incur the same expenditures. And that's why those two numbers are the same. Now, that's just one part of the analysis. Next, we have to look and see all the cash inflows that the survivors would get upon death. So first, again, sticking with Paul. So if Paul was to die, the surviving members would have access to immediate source of cash flow through savings and portfolio. So that would bring him 692. And the survivor, in this case, Jessica, she would still be generating income, or soon to be generating income, from her current age until she retires. That has a present value of 685. And we also have to look at Jessica's pension, because that too is a source of cash inflow. And these pensions would kick in 65 to 90. But nevertheless, we'd find out what the present value of that stream is today, i.e. when she's still 55. So if Paul dies, Jessica would have a cash inflow stream that has a present value today, 1769. And similar exercise, if Jessica was to die, Paul would still have a cash inflow stream that's worth 69.1 in today's present value terms. So therefore, the next step is to look at the shortfall. And so all the shortfall does is it looks at the difference between all the cash outflows and cash inflows. And the shortfall really is going to tell us how much life insurance is required in total. And when we do the calculation, so if Paul was to die, Jessica would be in a deficit of 139. And if Jessica was to die, Paul and the kids would be in a deficit of 217.5. That's the total. Now, we're going to compare that with what they already have. So their existing life insurance. And Paul has 1.14 million in insurance coming from these two sources. So 240,000. And that was through work. And the 900,000 he had owned privately. And Jessica has 1 million of insurance that she bought privately as well. Okay. So therefore, as per approach 1, which is a needs-based, you could see that they are both over-insured. Look at Paul's case. He only needs about 140,000 of life insurance on his life, but he's got almost 10 times that. So he doesn't need that much insurance. So as people age, their financial assets, which really is a source of self-insurance, increases. So if you have millions and millions of dollars, what do you need insurance for? If something should happen, your financial assets will pay for it or accommodate for it. And the other thing is you have fewer years of income replacement required. So the whole point of insurance is really to replace the income earner financially. So if there were only like 2-3 years left of employment, it's hard to make an argument for someone needing a lot of life insurance at that stage. So therefore, they should reduce the life insurance coverage, and therefore they could save on the premium cost, and this would add to their discretionary net cash flow each year. The second approach is the human life approach. And instead of looking at the survivor's cash flow needs, the human life approach looks at replacing the income benefits that the deceased was generating. So the starting point is the after-tax income that the individuals were generating. So let's just start off with Paul. And Paul is currently making after-tax income of 53.9. He's also bringing in benefits of 10,000, and these benefits include things like, employer contributions to his pension, employer payment of his health benefits, employer payment of dental, prescription. These are all things that Paul brings in because of his employment. So if we're going to get an insurance product, it needs to replace all the things that Paul was bringing in while he was alive. And the other thing is we're looking at the after-tax dollars in this case. Okay. Now, one thing that we have to take into account is if Paul was to die, there would be an expense reduction because, there's one less mouth to feed. You don't have to buy as many clothes to the family unit, as much food. So that part of the costs would decrease. So therefore, on a net basis, the after-tax income replacement would be $53,900. In other words, the insurance policy would need to generate $53,900 after tax each year just to replicate what Paul was bringing in after tax while he was alive. And similarly, same exercise for Jessica reveals a figure of $71,900. Now, these are after-tax amounts. So the next step is to calculate the before-tax equivalent. And assuming a tax rate of 30%, we'll use this general framework. It basically says net is whatever is left from the gross after we account for the leakage. So tax is certainly leakage. So if tax is 30%, then net would be 70% of whatever the gross is. However, in this case, we're actually trying to figure out the gross. So we rearrange this framework, we get the following, and if we apply it to these numbers right here, we get their respective figures, okay? So how do we interpret this? Let's look at Paul for a second. Paul's bringing in after tax $53,900. Therefore, we would need to make $77,000 before tax so that we would have the equivalent amount of $53,900 after tax. Okay, so basically, what we're saying is that when we do get these insurance proceeds for life insurance on an annual basis, it will be taxed, and so you'd be only left. So here it is. We want an insurance policy that pays us $77,000 before tax each year, so that after we do pay the tax, we can generate the same after-tax income as what Paul was bringing in while he was alive. Okay, and so of course we need to bring that in each year for 10 years because that's how long Paul was going to work. And again, what we need to do is we need to use the appropriate discount rate. Since we're assuming it's going to be $77,000 per year, we're using a real number. In other words, we're saying we need $77,000 each year in today's dollars. So we have to use the real discount rate. And the real discount rate is, you could think of it as the growth adjusted discount rate. So if the nominal rate is 3%, and their income growth is 2%, we can view that income growth as the equivalent of inflation. So we could argue that, the reason why they need their income to grow at 2% is because the goods and services they buy are increasing each year at the rate of 2%. So instead of growth, think of it as that's just their inflation rate. So therefore, approximately the real rate would be 1%, or more precisely 0.98. So once we find the present value of this income replacement, where we are in effect finding the life insurance required. And the other technical issue when we're calculating the life insurance required is that we have to keep in mind that if Paul was to die, the family would need $77,000 starting at the beginning of each year. In other words, if Paul was to die, the family cannot wait till the end of the year to receive the $77,000. They would actually need to start receiving the money right away. And that's why when we're doing the PV calculation, we use due mode. So these amounts represent how much insurance is needed using the life value or the human value approach. However, we have to look and see what their existing life insurance policies are. And you can see that both have more than enough insurance already. So once again, they're both overinsured. In the case of Paul, he just needs a total of $737,000, but he's got $1.14 million. So approach 2 also indicates overinsurance. And again, you should only buy what you need. So if they cut down on their insurance policy, they can save on their premium. What is the third factor that needs consideration? We also have to, at this stage, being 55, they're very close to retirement. So they have to look at their retirement and investment accounts. And these assets will be primarily used to fund the following goals. Paul and Jessica's retirement, obviously. And the framework is as follows. They have their retirement expenditures, and this is really based on their lifestyle. So the more extravagant their lifestyle, the greater their expenditures are. Now, a portion of that is going to be funded by government and work pension plans. So therefore, the residual is what needs to be funded by their personal accounts. Okay, so when we do retirement planning, we take government and work pensions as given. So then what we need to calculate is, well, how much extra do we need in retirement income in order to maintain the lifestyle that we want? And then that's the part that your portfolio has to work towards. The second goal for Paul and Jessica's investments and retirement accounts is to support the disability needs of their son, Peter, for the remainder of his life. Since it would be a high priority, this portion of the portfolio should be invested in safe assets. So clearly taking care of dependents is a very high priority, and that's not an account that we want to have too many risky assets in. One of the other goals that Paul and Jessica had was leaving an inheritance for Roxanne. Since this would be of a lower priority, and we're not saying it's low priority, we're just saying it's lower than trying to accommodate Peter's special needs. And besides, most inheritance are residual amounts, so we don't set a specific amount for bequests. Usually it's whatever's in the estate, we divide it proportionately, so it's not an exact amount. In any case, since it would be of lower priority and or longer horizon, so, Roxanne, at this stage is, I think, mid to late 20s, so it's going to be a long time for any inheritance. Therefore, this portion of the portfolio may be invested in higher risk return assets. Therefore, using a goal-based approach for this family may be appropriate, as each goal is distinct. This is in contrast to the mean variance optimization, which attempts to maximize the risk-adjusted return on the portfolio as a whole. So MVO says, all of this is your money, Paul and Jessica, so we just treat it as one. So let's just try to maximize the risk-adjusted return on this portfolio as a whole. However, that's really blending everything into one. Now, rationally, that's the best way to manage money, is using mean variance optimization. But in this particular case, goal-based might be the only way for this family to understand how their money is being invested. For example, for Peter, we're going to look at safe assets, so they can follow that. The family probably wouldn't know what Sharpe ratio is, but they would understand putting safe assets for Peter's account and looking at some riskier, high return assets for Roxanne's inheritance. And point 4, we have to look at the retirement and longevity risk. We're told that there's a possibility that the government may cut back on pension benefits and or the investment returns on the portfolio might underperform. Both of these are sources of income that this family is relying on when they retire. So if any of these amounts are going to be uncertain, then it's going to affect their retirement lifestyle. And there it is. Either can result in reduced retirement income or running out of capital prematurely. So either these individuals will have to reduce their expenditure so the capital can last, or they can just choose to maintain their lifestyle and spend whatever money they need, but then that would mean their capital would be depleted much sooner. And that's what longevity risk is. The individual running out of money while they're still alive. At later stages of life, the horizon is not long enough to recover from investment losses. Therefore, they should be investing in safer assets. So if a horizon is 20 or 30 years, the market can go through its most steepest correction, and there would be enough time for an individual to recover their assets. But if someone's horizon is only 5 years, that is definitely not enough time to recover from steep market losses, and therefore they should not be investing in risky assets. Purchasing power risk. If inflation increases, then the investment returns would be able to purchase less goods, and therefore their purchasing power would decrease. So if your investment is earning 5%, but the price of goods is increasing at 8%, that would mean each year your investment income is able to buy less and less goods. So one thing that's paramount whenever doing financial planning is that we at least not lose purchasing power when we're investing. So we always need to at least beat inflation in order to maintain purchasing power and therefore lifestyle. And they should keep assets in tax-sheltered plans as long as possible, because this would mean more periods of tax-free compounding. So if we recall, their registered retirement plans are tax-sheltered. So the more assets and the longer they leave it in those plans, you are actually earning more return without having to pay tax.